Understand this: how a covert narcissist operates and quietly makes their victims suffer. Have you ever felt like you walked away from a relationship carrying something you couldn't quite name? An invisible weight that left you feeling hollow, confused, and oddly guilty, even though you couldn't point to a single moment and say, "This is where it broke me"? A lot of people who've been involved with a covert narcissist describe that exact feeling. From the outside, nothing looked obviously wrong. There were no explosive fights, no public cruelty, no clear villain in the story. In fact, other people might have praised them for being sensitive or gentle, and yet quietly, something inside you was coming undone. Psychologists explain that this isn't imagined or exaggerated. It's the hallmark of covert narcissistic abuse. It doesn't hit you head on. It wears you down slowly, almost invisibly, until you no longer recognize yourself. A covert narcissist doesn't control through loud dominance or obvious intimidation. They control through uncertainty. Clinically, covert narcissism involves a shaky, fragile sense of self that's hidden behind humility, victimhood, or apparent kindness. Unlike the stereotypical narcissist who demands admiration outright, the covert type looks for validation in subtler ways, through sympathy, moral superiority, or quiet sacrifice that silently asks to be acknowledged. Their pain becomes the center of the relationship. Their sensitivity becomes a reason they can't be questioned. Before you realize it, you've slipped into the role of emotional caretaker, constantly managing their feelings while your own needs fade into the background. Psychologists point out that this is what makes the dynamic so damaging. It feels like empathy, but it functions like exploitation. At the core of this behavior is deep, unresolved shame. From a psychological point of view, shame is unbearable for the covert narcissist because it threatens the fragile identity they work so hard to protect. So instead of recognizing feelings like inadequacy or envy, those feelings are pushed outward. Rather than thinking, "I feel small," they create situations where you feel small. Confusion, guilt, and self-doubt start piling up on your side of the relationship, while they hold on to a story of themselves as misunderstood, morally upright, or unfairly treated. This emotional offloading isn't random. Psychologists describe it as a survival strategy, one that allows the narcissist to function without ever facing their own inner pain. One of the most damaging things about covert narcissistic abuse is how quiet it is. Trauma doesn't need screaming or violence to leave a mark. Clinicians consistently explain that ongoing emotional invalidation, passive-aggressive comments, and the sudden withdrawal of warmth trigger the same stress responses in the brain as more obvious abuse. Your nervous system learns that safety is unpredictable. One day they're caring, wounded, almost tender. The next, they're distant, cold, or subtly punishing. That back and forth teaches your brain that closeness isn't safe, and over time, it creates a powerful trauma bond. Trauma bonding doesn't happen because someone is weak. It happens because the brain gets trained to chase relief. Psychologists explain that you're not attached to the pain itself. You're attached to the moments when the pain stops. Stress floods your body with cortisol and adrenaline, and then a brief return to warmth releases dopamine and oxytocin. That chemical swing makes hope feel like survival. Slowly, you start believing that if you explain yourself better, stay calmer, or become more understanding, things will finally settle. For the narcissist, this keeps the dynamic exactly where they want it. For you, it slowly erodes your sense of self, replacing trust in yourself with constant self-monitoring. Covert narcissists rarely lash out in obvious ways. Instead, they communicate through implication. A sigh that feels heavy, a pause that says more than words, a comment disguised as vulnerability, like, "I guess I'm just too sensitive," or "I didn't expect you to take it that way." Psychologists call this plausible deniability. It allows harm to be delivered without anything concrete to point to. If you try to address it, they often look hurt or confused, and suddenly you're the one apologizing for overreacting. This role reversal is deeply destabilizing because it makes you question your own emotional reality. Over time, you may notice yourself constantly watching for changes in tone or mood. A look becomes a warning. Silence feels threatening. Even calm moments don't feel truly calm. Clinically, this is known as hypervigilance, a nervous system stuck on high alert because it learned that emotional danger can appear at any moment. Anxiety, irritability, and exhaustion creep in, often without a clear reason. For the narcissist, this dysregulation works in their favor. A confused, anxious partner is easier to control. For you, regulation becomes nearly impossible in a relationship where safety is never consistent. Gaslighting is another quiet but powerful tool in covert narcissistic abuse. It doesn't usually sound extreme. It sounds ordinary. "That's not what I meant. You're reading too much into it." Or, "I never said that. You must be misremembering." On their own, these phrases seem harmless. Over time, though, they chip away at your trust in your own perception. Chronic stress already weakens the hippocampus, the part of the brain involved in memory and context. In that state, doubt settles in easily, and self-trust starts to fall apart. For the narcissist, gaslighting protects their fragile self-image. Taking responsibility would mean facing shame they can't tolerate. For you, gaslighting creates constant mental tension, the pull between what you feel and what you're told is real. To make that tension bearable, many people turn inward and assume blame. It often feels safer to think something is wrong with me than to face the truth that someone you care about is hurting you. Psychologists emphasize that this self-blame isn't a flaw, it's a survival response to an emotionally unsafe environment. Understanding all of this isn't about slapping labels on people or assigning moral judgment. It's about getting your clarity back. When you learn how covert narcissism actually works, how shame gets exported, how control hides behind vulnerability, how trauma bonds form, you start to reclaim your inner authority. Healing begins when you name what happened, create distance from ongoing harm, and gently teach your nervous system what safety feels like again. What once felt like a personal failure starts to make sense for what it truly was: a deeply human response to a deeply unhealthy relationship. Covert narcissists have a way of turning empathy itself into a weapon, and that's what makes them so hard to spot. Empathy is usually where we feel safest. It's what we associate with goodness, care, and trust. But with a covert narcissist, empathy becomes a tool. They're often drawn to people who are kind, thoughtful, and emotionally aware, not by chance, but because those people are capable of deep self-reflection and taking responsibility. From a psychological point of view, that makes them easy to pull into emotional labor. The narcissist's pain slowly becomes the center of everything. Their struggles take up all the air in the room. And when you finally try to talk about how you feel, the focus quietly shifts back to them. "I'm barely coping," or "I can't handle this right now." Psychologists call this emotional hijacking. Your feelings aren't openly rejected. They're made to feel inappropriate, selfish, or cruel for even existing. After a while, you stop bringing things up, not because you don't care, but because speaking feels risky. This self-silencing isn't a conscious choice. It's something your nervous system learns over time. Each attempt to be honest is met with distance, guilt, or subtle punishment, and the message sinks in: your feelings cause problems. For the narcissist, this emotional quiet feels like relief and control. For you, it feels like disappearing inside your own life. Loneliness grows, resentment settles in quietly, and you start to lose touch with who you really are. Psychologists often describe this as a form of learned helplessness. The mind stops trying to change things because every attempt has led to pain. Instead of expressing anger directly, covert narcissists tend to let it leak out sideways. They show it through passive aggression, showing up late, breaking promises, forgetting things that matter to you, or subtly sabotaging plans. Psychologically, this allows them to release anger without ever having to admit they're angry. They can still see themselves as the reasonable or kind one while control stays firmly in their hands. For you, the effect is deeply unsettling. You feel hurt, but you can't quite explain why. There's no clear offense to point to. Over time, you start questioning your reactions, wondering if you're just too sensitive. That self-doubt chips away at your trust in yourself, which is exactly what keeps the dynamic going. As the pattern continues, something quieter but deeper begins to happen. Your sense of self starts to crack. Making decisions feels harder. Confidence fades. You might catch yourself checking their mood before making even small choices, or feeling oddly dependent on how they react to feel okay. Clinicians explain that long-term invalidation weakens the brain's ability to assert inner authority, the part responsible for judgment, boundaries, and agency. Slowly, their version of reality starts to matter more than yours. What you feel becomes secondary to how it might be received. This isn't weakness. It's what happens when someone lives inside psychological pressure for too long. Healing doesn't usually start with confrontation, because confrontation assumes the other person can meet you in accountability. In covert narcissistic dynamics, that balance was never there. Healing starts with clarity. One of the most painful but freeing realizations for survivors is understanding that this was never about poor communication. It was about power. No amount of explaining or being more patient can fix a situation that only works for one person. That realization often brings grief because it shatters the hope that trying harder could have saved things. But it also brings relief. When that illusion falls away, self-blame finally loosens. Distance, emotional, mental, or physical, is often a crucial part of recovery. Therapists emphasize that even small amounts of ongoing contact can reactivate old trauma responses. Low contact or no contact isn't about punishment. It's about giving your nervous system a chance to settle. When the constant tension disappears, the brain finally has room to breathe. At first, anxiety can spike. This is the pull of the trauma bond, but with time, clarity starts to return. You see patterns you couldn't see before. Your body learns that peace doesn't require constant alertness. As you heal, anger and grief often show up later than expected. That's not a setback. It's a sign you're waking up. Anger means your boundaries are coming back online. Grief honors what you lost, the relationship you hoped for, the person you thought they were, and the parts of yourself you had to silence to survive. Psychologically, this is a sign that numbness is lifting and integration is beginning. The narcissist's influence depends on confusion and emotional shutdown. When your feelings return, even the painful ones, it means that influence is fading. Recovery is really about learning to trust yourself again. Trauma-informed therapy helps by validating your experience instead of questioning it. Body-based practices help calm a nervous system that's been on edge for too long. Writing, learning about trauma, and understanding what happened give you your story back. The goal isn't to erase the past, but to place it where it belongs, behind you, not inside you. As many clinicians remind survivors, the reactions you once judged as flaws were actually smart responses to an unhealthy situation. Covert narcissists operate in silence, implication, and confusion. Their power lives in your self-doubt. When clarity returns, when your body settles, and your inner voice gets stronger, the dynamic starts to fall apart. Not because they change, but because you do. This understanding isn't about blaming or labeling. It's about reclaiming reality. And once reality is fully yours again, covert narcissism no longer has a place to hide.